Welcome back. Having already passed through the basic concepts and terminology, we are actually ready to get started with the apps building. The first application we are going to build is to use the GitHub API. So there are some basic steps you need to always take when you start working with an API. The two most important things are to find the documentation of the API, and depending on the frequency of usage of the API, the documentation is going to be well developed. So here is the GitHub API documentation. You may find it on developer.github.com version 3, v3. So it's up to you to pass through the main things to have a basic idea. Here are given a lot of examples that you will start understanding once the course is over. So this is the first milestone you need to be aware of. The second one, this is the root or the main endpoint that you need. The API is located on a specific address, and from there on are given the different endpoints. These are endpoints for different resources. When you start building an application based on an API, it's important to be aware of the kind of information you need. Then to find the endpoint required, and from there on to start building. Some common features. When you see something, some of the parameters given with curly brackets, it means that this is a substitution. Here, programmatically and dynamically, you need to give different resources. You may see them here, and here, and here. Okay. The API structure is represented as a JSON. You remember those key value pairs we spoke about, and the separation is done with a comma. Okay, so remember again, this is an endpoint, and here are located unique resources. This is the basic structure of an API. Good. What we want to do. It's an advice that I'm giving you because I just use it every time before starting building an application. A piece of advice that you may also find useful, especially if you develop by yourself. Because when you work in a company or when you work in a team, usually you have some visual materials, you have some design provided. But because for the sake of the course, for example, I'm developing by myself and I am building the model and thinking of what I want to show in my application, I always make something as a mock-up. I draw either on paper or in this case on the computer the screens, and on this way I know what I want to show. From there on I start searching for approaches and for different methods in which this can be done. So the idea, there are 3 screens. I can register with my username on the first screen. Please have in mind that in order this to work for you, I mean you to register by yourself, you need to have a GitHub profile. If you don't have a GitHub profile, you have 2 options. The first one, to go and register, and the second option, to use somebody else's, just to have the credentials of somebody else. But I really advise you on just making a profile just to see how the whole process is going to be structured. Of course, you may use mine as well if you want. So we'll be having 3 screens. On the first screen, we want to enter our username, just the username without a password for the sake of simplicity. So we are having a username, and then we have a login button. Once the login button is pressed, we are going on the second screen, or this is the user screen. On the second screen is the information we want to retrieve from the API. Here it is. So from here we want to find the exact information that is needed. We want to have the picture of the user that has already been registered, username, login name, the number of followers, the number of the people the user is following, and the email. This is the structure of our second screen, the user screen. The third screen, we have a button, repositories. So what we want is when we press on this button to be loaded the third screen. On the third screen, we are having above the name of the user. From there on, we are having the repository name, the description of the repository, and the language the repository is written in. That's it. That's what our application is going to look like, and that's the information we need to retrieve from the GitHub API. Again, 3 screens. We log in with our username, the real one if you want to see our profile. We press login. We have our information, repositories. Our repositories are loaded. Here we'll make a scroll bar, and on this way we may see the various repositories that the user has provided. So that's the mockup. Let's have a look just at the general structure of the API and see if we may find something that could be useful. For example, look at this. We have the user URL. The user's URL is located here. See? So we have the the API github.com users and user. Here we will use our login. So let's just demonstrate and see what will happen. Here you are. We are writing it on this way. Of course, not found because the user needs to be substituted with our user. So here it is. These are my credentials. So here you are. This is my profile, and this is the information, the basic information. How I found it? Again, I used the endpoint for the user's URL. This one. You see how many resources you have from here on. And seeing it on this way is not a problem, but I told you that there is a better way to see a JSON via a JSON viewer. So what I will do is to copy this one here, put it in the online JSON viewer. That's the URL. And when I press the viewer, here you are. That's actually the information I'm having in my endpoint here. Just in a better way, at least for me, it's easier to work with the JSON viewers. So if we consult the mockup, I needed username, login, followers, email. And here is the information. We have the login. We have the number of followers, the number of following, the email, and what else we wanted? The name. So we have the whole information for the users here. Then we need the repos. So here it is. If we use it, let's see what will happen. Actually, it's easier to take it from here, just to see it again, the repos URL, you may see that between the repos is written my username, which means that it's again a resource that needs to be substituted. Here can be everyone's name. Okay, you see some other information, so I'm taking it here. And using the viewer, you may see that the information is located in different structures. You see the difference? So whereas the first one was within the rectangular brackets only, from here on we have the curly brackets. In other words, now we're working with arrays. Alright, what we need to think about is how to take specific information for each and every of these repositories. Here is, for example, the name of the application. After that, we may find the language the application is written in, as well as the description. But let's start once at a time. The most important things you need to remember are you always need to be aware of the endpoint or of the main structure of the API. From there on, you need to know something about the documentation because documentation actually tells you everything. You just need to be able to read it. Here are the different methods and everything that you may use. And from there on, you just retrieve the information you are interested in. You're using a JSON viewer just because it's easier to work on this way. So having the basic structure and knowing what we need to do, the login screen, the user screen, and the repository screen, we are ready to start.